Welcome. I hope you're having a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. This weekend, we are just embracing the opportunity we have as we get out of COVID to get together with family and friends, to take off our masks, to hug each other, just to sit around a table. These are simple joys that we once took for granted and that we no longer do. I don't know about you, but I never will again. This weekend, we honor the men and women who gave, as President Lincoln so memorably said, the last full measure of devotion for their country. They did it so that we can do all the things we're doing this weekend: gather, celebrate, be together in freedom and in safety. And we honor their sacrifice, and we are so grateful. This weekend is a fitting time, in my view, to explore today's topic, which is how we change, which is how we grow and transform into communities of peace, how we live together in unity, in understanding, and in peace, locally and globally. It's a tall order, but wise men and women throughout history have shown us ways that we can try, and we must, so that someday new names will not be added to the rolls of those we honor on Memorial Days to come. This process starts with each of us. It is truly an inside job. However, it surely does not stop with us. Our goal is not to find inner peace and remain in solitude up on some figurative mountain. We are here in this time and this place to mix it up, to be a presence for peace, forgiveness, kindness, and compassion in the midst of our busy lives. As Henry Nouwen put it, the spiritual life does not remove us from the world, but leads us deeper into it. We learn, we practice, so that we can leave this place more loving and more kind than it was when we first showed up. We are here to be a presence of those loving qualities in the midst of our busy daily lives. I'd like to give many thanks to the speakers we've had this month who have shared with us practical steps we take on walking this path. From Reverend Mary Lou Palmer talking about new beginnings, to Reverend Chris Kell, who explored the power of surrender, to Asha Lightbearer last week sharing her insights on the wisdom that unfolds for us as we work the 12 steps of AA. We've also learned more about the Buddha's Eightfold Path to Awakening, which is a process for detaching ourselves from the suffering that arises in our lives when we see life only through the eyes of separation or through the eyes of ego. So, if I had one takeaway from this month, it would be that these processes, as they say in AA, work if you work them. I like to say that we here at One World are a community of practice, and our goal this month has been to emphasize that point and suggest some of the different practices that are out there and that are available to us. They work if you work them. They are like exercise, like diet, like anything we might try to use to change our lives. We do it for a bit, we give up, there's no change. They work if you work them. So I'm closing out the month with another set of practices, and I hope you'll take the time to explore them on your own. The author I turn to today is Armstrong. I've talked about her before, and her wonderful book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. Armstrong has long been a force for compassion in our world. She spent her early years as a religious sister. She then left the convent and became a scholar of comparative religions. After her early years in the convent, she found herself in Jerusalem making a movie about the early years of Christianity. But when she was there, she found that she knew so little about the other faith traditions that live together in Jerusalem, and all three view it as a major city in their faith traditions. And so she began to study Judaism and Islam. She began to lecture and teach about the need for greater interfaith understanding, and not so much acceptance, as so many people call it, but appreciation and welcoming of other faith traditions as a means to help us understand our common humanity across traditions. Regardless of language or liturgy or imagery, we humans, wherever we are, create traditions that emphasize compassion, community, forgiveness, kindness, and peace. What is the message there? We do it because that is in our DNA. It is in our hearts when we arrive here. It's who we are. In February of 2008, she won the TED Prize, awarded annually to those creative thinkers who are dedicated to creating positive global change. She used the opportunity to call for a charter of compassion, a call to action for all nations and for all of us to turn to a more compassionate way of living together in a world that is increasingly divided and fearful. She saw it really as our only way forward. So the Charter for Compassion was crafted by a multi-faith, multinational group that called itself the Council of Conscience. The creators of the Charter envisioned the creation of compassionate cities, compassionate communities in which all are respected and nurtured. The city of Atlanta has adopted a resolution making itself a compassionate city. As Armstrong writes, a compassionate world is a peaceful world. Our reading today, which is by Linda Wendt, is a reading of the Charter for Compassion. Armstrong travels the world promoting compassionate action as what she calls the task of our time, the only way we are going to be able to live together in a sustainable global community. Teaching compassion can be challenging because it's a change in the way we think. It's a change for our paradigm. On the one hand, every world religion has compassion at its heart. Every single one has an iteration of what we call the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or the inverse of that, which is sometimes called the silver rule, do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. On the other hand, as she said in her 2008 TED Talk, when she goes in front of church groups and speaks about compassionate action, she does not see a bunch of welcoming faces. She sees faces that she describes as mutinous. And she says that she concludes that apparently people would rather be right than compassionate. Compassion requires us to put our ego aside and to see the world through the view of another and act on that vision. It is not easy. So where do we start? Armstrong's book rose out of her wish to give us a process, to give us steps to awaken compassion in our own lives and bring it to the world. She gave us a 12-step program, and again, it works if you work it. As she puts it, you don't learn to drive by reading the manual. You have to get in the car, start it up, back out of the driveway, and go. You have to put these principles into action in your own life. So today I'd like to share with you her 12 steps for a compassionate life. Take a look at this resource if you have the time. And if you're interested, try it out. If it really resonates with you, get together with some friends and do it together. It is a wonderful program. And again, you have to work it for it to have an effect in your life. So her first step is learn about compassion. Learn about compassion. Each of the world's faith traditions teaches compassion in different scriptures, language, imagery, or stories, or myths. Here she says, take a look at your own traditions, or at whatever tradition resonates with you, and sit with their teachings on compassion. There are myths and stories and imagery that open our hearts and our imaginations to the world of others, that lead us deeper into understanding our connection to each other and understanding what compassion is. The term compassion means to endure something with another person, to endure something with another person. The other person is not an object of pity because that separates you from her. The other person is one whom you accompany through pain, through grief, through whatever experience, putting yourself in her shoes and stepping into her point of view. We also take the opportunity to look at the scriptures of other faith traditions. We see that the call for compassion and peace is a universal one. It's woven into our very essence as human beings. Each tradition has its own rich way of conveying this wisdom. She tells the story of the Buddha. who, after he'd left his wealthy lifestyle and lived for several years as an ascetic, eating so little that he nearly died, realized that what had brought him the most joy in his whole life was not that, but it was an experience he had as a young child when his family had brought him to a festival and sat him under an apple tree for a while. He saw a few shoots of grass that had been torn up and some tiny insects that had been killed as a result. And as he sat and watched, he felt a welling up of grief. And that moment of empathy took him outside of himself. As he continued to sit, he experienced a welling up of spontaneous joy. This memory taught him that instead of trying only to annihilate desire or violence or whatever destructive emotions he was targeting, he must also foster loving kindness, concern for all, the ability to release the focus on himself. It taught him that compassion and empathy lead to joy. This is a wonderfully powerful story. Is it historically true? We don't know, but the lesson is timeless. It's a great example of what we can, I want to say learn, but I also want to say experience by opening ourselves to these different scriptures. In the Jewish tradition, the story is told of the sage Hillel, who was approached by a non-believer who promised to convert to Judaism if Hillel could stand on one leg and at the same time recite the entire Torah. So he replied, "What is hateful to yourself, do not do to your fellow man. That is the whole of the Torah, and the rest is but commentary. Go and study it." We look into our own hearts to see what causes us pain, and we then refuse to inflict it on others. The Prophet Muhammad said it this way: "Not one of you can be a believer unless he desires for his neighbor what he desires for himself." In the Christian scriptures, what is the message? If I have all the eloquence of men or of angels but speak without love, I am simply a gong booming or a cymbal clashing. What are the messages here? Love and connection and compassion across these different faith traditions. When we sit with such wisdom, letting it simply speak to us, we draw it into our hearts, we internalize it, we remember truths we knew but perhaps had forgotten. Her second step is look at your own world. So scriptures, however inspirational, are no use unless they help us live our lives right now, in this world right here. We don't need rituals or liturgies that spoke to people who have been dead for 2,000 years. We need wisdom that helps us today. So in this step, we look at our own families, communities, friendships, nation, our own world, and we use this ancient wisdom to help us through our issues today, in today's times. In our modern world, we have this continuing clash over how to read the scriptures, particularly over how to read the Christian scriptures. We have many who claim the, quote, traditional way is to read the scriptures literally. In actuality, that is a very recent way to approach these texts. It is not at all traditional. If you went up to a first century Jew and told her that the Torah must be interpreted historically or literally, she would look at you as though you had lost your mind. The stories were myth, they were allegory, teaching a truth that very likely didn't happen, but which nonetheless is eternally true. Did Jacob actually wrestle with an angel, or is the myth asking us to wrestle with our own doubts and fears? Which version leads us into deeper understanding, deeper connection with God? That is the way to read it. Armstrong writes that St. Augustine, the formational Christian theologian, insisted that Scripture taught only charity. Think about this. This is a mind-bending thought. She writes, whatever the biblical author may have intended, any passage that seems to preach hatred and was not conducive to love must be interpreted allegorically and made to speak of love. That is an amazing notion. How can that open up the Bible to exploration, interpretation, and application in our own lives? So ask yourself, what does this wisdom teach me about right now, about getting along with my coworker, my spouse, those with whom I just don't agree on anything? Use this wisdom to expand your own ability to navigate these issues. Her third step is compassion for yourself. And again, as we go through these steps, you will notice that they are cumulative. Each one calls upon the skills that we gained in the earlier ones. The third, again, is compassion for yourself. In the same way that peace begins with us, compassion does as well. She tells the story of Rabbi Albert Friedlander, who lived as a child in Nazi Germany, and he was just inundated with messages of his own inferiority. So one day, as a child, as he lay in bed, he made a list in his mind of all his gifts and of all his good qualities, and he determined, if he lived, to keep his focus on them and use them to build a better world. He grew into an extraordinarily kind and gentle man. He said, however, that he could never have shown love for anyone else if he had not first learned to love himself. Start with yourself. It may very well be your highest hurdle. We are often so much harder on ourselves than anyone else. This step calls for self-awareness and clarity in much the same way as step 4 of the AA program, which calls for a searching and fearless moral inventory. We see ourselves clearly, our gifts and our weaknesses. To truly extend compassion to ourselves, we look not with judgment or condemnation, but with forgiveness and perhaps a little gentle humor. We step back and we know, for example, when we look at our weaknesses, we know that this is not us at our deepest level. We know that it is fear, it is doubt, it is not us. Only then, when we look at others with their weaknesses and flaws that punch all our buttons, can we also extend compassion to them as well. Others too act from fear, and when we see it in ourselves, we cannot help but also recognize it in them as well. So this leads us into the 4th step, which is empathy. As we become acquainted with our own weaknesses, our own pain, we are more able to understand it in others. The 5th step, also associated, is mindfulness. Now, this is a quality we speak about a great deal, and it's been involved in the previous 4 steps, but her goal, as she articulates these different steps, is to ask us for each step just to focus on that quality. It's not that it's not used in the other steps, but this is an opportunity to focus on just that one. So the 5th step is mindfulness. As you go through your day, you can observe your shifting emotions and the causes of them. What causes you irritation or stress? What brings you joy? What punches your buttons? You become more able to direct your thoughts, releasing the stress and choosing to return to what brings you back into balance, to what gives you joy in this very moment. As you learn more about your own responses to the incoming stream of life, so you are able to understand more about others. So now we move into action, the necessary next step. Here, we bring our awareness to applying the lessons learned to our dealings with each other. My daughter Catherine taught me a lesson on this the other day. I was in a very bad mood from something which I'm sure was hugely important, but now which I've completely forgotten. And it apparently was spilling over into my interactions with the kids. Finally, she had just had enough. And she said, "Mom, do you know what my teacher taught me? When you're in a bad mood, don't take it out on others." She was obviously a master of this step. As Armstrong puts it, shield others from your destructive tendencies and try to lighten their lives with acts of friendship. But there are times we don't feel it. So what do we do then? It's amazing how the actions we take lead to changes in how we feel. It was C.S. Lewis who said, "Do not waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did." As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you are behaving as if you loved someone, you will presently come to love him. Step out and put these principles into action. The seventh step is one which so resonates with me. She calls it how little we know. How little we know. We tend to be such snap experts. We tend to have opinions on everything. We know so much about stuff. In this step, we examine our assumptions, our judgments, our snap decisions about people, about events, and we examine in detail what we actually know about it. If you're like me, that is probably lots less than you think. Are you making room for more information? Are you willing to enter into another's viewpoint based on facts that you learn? Or are you sticking with what you already believe or what you know, come hell or high water, regardless of the facts? Again, this is an exercise to help us enter into another's viewpoint, to, as she puts it, make place for the other. We find out how little we know. The next step, the eighth, flows into the seventh step actually flows into the next one, which focuses our awareness on dialogue. She calls it, how should we speak to one another? So all too often, we don't discuss. What we do instead is we engage in serial monologues. I wait, often impatiently, for you to finish talking until I can jump in with my brilliant observations, which I've been formulating in my mind while I have been waiting for you to stop talking. I have not been, however, listening. This step encourages us to remember we may not know and to listen with respect and openness to the other. If they seem fearful, there is a reason why, and we have the opportunity to extend understanding and empathy to them instead of judgment. So often we feel personally attacked when our viewpoint is questioned. Why? Can we remove our ego from these discussions? What happens when we do? How does the quality of that interaction change? Her next step, the ninth step, is concern for everybody. Here, we take a step out of our tendency to limit our care and concern to those we know, those who look like us, those who believe like us. The Quran teaches, behold, I have created you all out of a male and a female and have formed you into tribes and nations so that you may get to know one another. Yes, we form into groups, but we learn from our differences that we are all one. Our differences give us the opportunity to see beyond them, to recognize each other as neighbors, as sisters, as brothers. Especially in today's world, we cannot retreat behind walls, behind cultural similarities, geography, or skin color, behind any artificial indicator that separates us from them. We do not have room. We do not have time. Her 10th step is knowledge. This one is closely related to the earlier step, asking how little we know. Find out about other countries, other cultures, other faith traditions. Don't rely on what you're told, what you read on the internet, what you read on Facebook, what folks tell you. Find out for yourself. What are your assumptions about other cultures or faith traditions? Take time to learn if your assumptions are accurate, and if they're not, you can move past them. Take the time to learn with curiosity and openness. The 11th step she calls recognition. Again, this one flows from the earlier ones. This is where you take a moment and recognize within yourself what is yours to do. Just yours that fits your gifts. As Armstrong puts it, there is a need that you and only you can fulfill. Find out what your mission is, and then step out and begin it. Her 12th step is the one that brings all the steps together. She calls it love your enemies. It is this ethic that will make future Memorial Days moments to honor sacrifices long past. It is truly concern for all. It is certainly the culmination of the earlier steps. But as we move forward, as we learn compassion, as we learn empathy, it is a step that we can take. Toward the end of his life, Gandhi said that he no longer hated anyone. He said, "Mine is not an exclusive love. I cannot love Muslims or Hindus and hate Englishmen. For if I love merely Hindus and Muslims because their ways are on the whole pleasing to me, I shall soon begin to hate them when their ways displease me, as they may well do at any moment. A love that is based on the goodness of those whom you love is a mercenary affair." This is not easy, and it's not immediate. I have not managed it, and sometimes I don't even know where to start. What I do know is that these 12 steps are a wonderful road to travel with our hearts open and willing. It's where we start, and the ending is up to us. So, thank you so much for listening, and I'd like to close with a reading by Linda Wendt of the Charter for Compassion.
Good morning. Today I'm going to read to you from the Charter of Compassion. So the Charter for Compassion began in 2008 with the submission of thousands from over 100 countries. Working with a website set up for this purpose, they added their vision to what exactly should be included in this global affirmation of community and peace. In 2009, a multi-faith group of religious scholars and other leaders met in Vevey, Switzerland to review this input from seekers around the world. And from their voices, they crafted the final charter. I'd like to share their call to action, our call to action, with you. So here is a Charter for Compassion. There's really 4 parts to this charter. So first, the principle of compassion. The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions, calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves. Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures, to dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there, and to honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being, treating everybody without exception with absolute justice, equity, and respect. Second, it is also necessary in both public and private life to refrain consistently and empathically from inflicting pain. To act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest to impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody, and to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies, is a denial of our common humanity. We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately, and that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion. Third, we therefore call upon all men and all women to restore compassion to the center of morality and religion, to return to the ancient principle that any interpretation of Scripture that breeds violence, hatred, or disdain is illegitimate, to ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information about other traditions, religions, and cultures, to encourage a positive appreciation of cultural and religious diversity, to cultivate an informed empathy with the suffering of all human beings, even those regarded as enemies. And fourth, we urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world. Rooted in a principled determination to transcend selfishness, compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological and religious boundaries. Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential to human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity. It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable to the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community.